Was the wisest man in history intellectually defeated by a woman whose brilliance threatened the patriarchal foundations of biblical narrative? This question strikes at the heart of how power shapes historical memory. While King Solomon stands immortalized as wisdom personified, evidence suggests the Queen of Sheba, whose actual name remains conspicuously absent from biblical texts, may have been the true intellectual giant of their encounter. The systematic diminishment of her achievements represents perhaps one of history's most consequential erasures of female intellectual prowess. The biblical account in 1 Kings reduces their legendary meeting to a mere 5 verses, describing how she came to test him with hard questions, and Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. This suspiciously brief treatment stands in stark contrast to elaborate traditions preserved in Ethiopian, Arabian, and Persian sources that describe a sophisticated battle of intellects where Solomon frequently found himself intellectually cornered. The Kebir Nagast, Ethiopia's national epic, provides detailed accounts of philosophical exchanges where the queen repeatedly exposed the limitations of Solomon's understanding. In one telling encounter, she presented Solomon with a collection of identically dressed children and challenged him to distinguish their social origins without speaking to them. When Solomon failed, she demonstrated how subtle behavioral patterns revealed their backgrounds, showcasing an understanding of human psychology that transcended his knowledge of proverbs and legal judgments. Another tradition preserved in Yemenite Jewish sources describes how she presented Solomon with 2 identical roses, one real, one artificial but perfumed to smell authentic. When Solomon couldn't determine which was natural, she released bees into the chamber. Their immediate attraction to the real flower demonstrated her superior understanding of natural systems and her ability to design tests that exposed the boundaries of human perception. The subtext was clear. Memorized wisdom has limits that intuitive understanding transcends. Persian accounts detail a particularly revealing exchange where she questioned Solomon about the nature of divine justice. When Solomon recited traditional answers about divine rewards and punishments, she systematically dismantled his arguments by pointing to observable contradictions in human experience, righteous people suffering while the wicked prospered. Her questioning reportedly left Solomon silent before his court, a rare moment of intellectual capitulation carefully excised from biblical accounts. What makes these accounts particularly compelling is their consistency across diverse cultural traditions despite developing independently. The portrait that emerges is of a woman whose intellect operated beyond the constraints of conventional wisdom. While Solomon's wisdom drew from established tradition and inherited knowledge, the queen appears to have possessed an innovative intelligence that could identify patterns, construct novel challenges, and penetrate to fundamental principles rather than memorized conclusions. Archaeological findings at Marib, the likely capital of Sheba, in modern Yemen, further support the image of a sophisticated culture capable of producing such intellectual leadership. The complex irrigation systems discovered there, dating to precisely this historical period, demonstrate engineering prowess that surpassed contemporaneous Israelite achievements. These structures required not just technical skill but sophisticated mathematical understanding and organizational systems to maintain. This evidence suggests the queen's kingdom possessed advanced knowledge that would have equipped her to challenge Solomon on multiple intellectual fronts. Linguistic analysis of the biblical account itself reveals subtle acknowledgments of her intellectual victory hidden in plain sight. When 1 Kings states that she had seen all Solomon's wisdom, the Hebrew term used for seen, araya, carries connotations of evaluation and judgment, not mere observation. Similarly, her famous declaration that not even half was told me can be read as diplomatic understatement rather than genuine surprise, particularly when followed by her statement that she had added wisdom and goodness to what she had heard, suggesting she found his reputation exaggerated rather than fulfilled. Perhaps most telling is what happened after their encounter. While biblical accounts emphasize the gifts she brought Solomon, Ethiopian traditions maintain that she returned with something far more valuable: knowledge of monotheistic religion and legal systems that she implemented in her kingdom. This pragmatic application of their exchange suggests she approached their meeting not as a subordinate seeking validation but as a ruler seeking useful knowledge for practical governance, and succeeded in her mission. The patriarchal framing of their encounter permeates how history remembers them. Solomon is portrayed as the established wisdom figure whose reputation draws admirers, while the queen appears as the seeker who travels to confirm what she has heard. Yet a more objective reading suggests an alternative. A diplomatic mission where an equally powerful ruler conducted an intellectual assessment of a potential ally and trading partner, finding both strengths and weaknesses to inform her kingdom's future relations. The diminishment of the queen's intellectual achievement represents more than historical curiosity. It exemplifies how power structures shape which intellectual traditions survive and which are marginalized. Had her perspectives been preserved with the same care as Solomon's proverbs, would Western philosophy and theology have developed different contours? Would female intellectual authority have found earlier acceptance in religious and scholarly traditions? Her intellectual victory over Solomon thus represents not just a historical footnote but a profound what-if moment, a glimpse of an alternative intellectual tradition that recognized feminine wisdom as equal or superior to masculine knowledge, only to be systematically minimized by subsequent patriarchal editing. The controversial truth may be that history's greatest exemplar of wisdom was himself outsmarted by a woman whose name biblical authors couldn't bring themselves to preserve, even as they acknowledged her existence. Did Solomon, celebrated for his moral authority, manipulate sacred hospitality customs to seduce the Queen of Sheba? And did she transform this potential exploitation into a strategic dynastic triumph? While the Bible presents their relationship as purely diplomatic, ancient texts from Ethiopia, Arabia, and Persia tell a radically different story, one where intellectual fascination evolved into physical desire, political calculation intertwined with personal attraction, and what began as Solomon's seduction scheme culminated in the queen's long-term dynastic victory. The Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's national epic, explicitly describes how Solomon, captivated by the queen's beauty and intellect, employed a calculated strategy to share her bed. According to this tradition, Solomon hosted an elaborate feast where he deliberately served heavily spiced and salted foods. Before the banquet, he extracted a promise from the queen that she would take nothing from his house without permission. When she inevitably reached for water during the night, parched from the deliberately oversalted meal, Solomon appeared and claimed she had broken her oath. The price for this breach? To fulfill his desire. This account presents a troubling dynamic. Solomon, unable to win the queen through honest courtship, resorted to manipulating hospitality customs, considered sacred throughout the ancient Near East, to achieve his aims. It portrays a man whose celebrated wisdom failed him when confronted with female beauty and intellect he could not easily possess, pushing him toward deception rather than honorable courtship. Arabian traditions offer an even more explicit account, describing how Solomon, having heard rumors of the queen having hairy legs or possibly goat's feet, a common demonization of powerful foreign women in ancient texts, constructed a palace with a floor that appeared to be water. When the queen lifted her skirts to cross what she thought was a pool, Solomon observed her legs, determining she was fully human and thus an appropriate object of desire. This voyeuristic episode underscores the objectification present even in his intellectual curiosity about her. Persian accounts add another dimension, suggesting the queen deliberately tested Solomon's moral character by appearing before him in progressively more revealing attire during their meetings, assessing whether his famed wisdom would be compromised by physical desire. In these versions, Solomon fails this moral test, proving that his intellectual achievements remained vulnerable to basic physical temptation. What makes these accounts particularly significant is how they reframe the power dynamic between the two monarchs. While initial encounters show Solomon attempting to assert dominance through intellectual contests and then sexual manipulation, the ultimate outcome suggests the queen maintained agency throughout, transforming what Solomon may have intended as a conquest into a calculated dynastic alliance. Yemenite Jewish traditions preserve an account where the queen, recognizing Solomon's intentions before the feast, prepared herself by consuming specific herbs and foods that would allow her to resist thirst through the night, only pretending to need water when it served her purpose. This version suggests she was not an unwitting victim of Solomon's scheme but recognized and countered it, participating only when it aligned with her own objectives. Archaeological evidence from both regions provides tantalizing context for their relationship. The discovery of ancient trade routes connecting Israel and the Arabian Peninsula, particularly the incense roads, confirms the economic foundations for their diplomatic relationship. More intriguingly, Contemporary Sabaean inscriptions from Yemen reference royal diplomatic marriages as common practice for securing trade alliances. This historical context suggests their intimate relationship would have been not just plausible but potentially expected given the diplomatic practices of the era. The intimate dimensions of their relationship acquired profound political significance through its outcome. According to Ethiopian tradition, their union produced a son, Menelik I, meaning son of the wise man, who would establish the Solomonic dynasty that ruled Ethiopia for nearly 3 millennia until Haile Selassie's deposition in 1974. If accurate, this transforms the entire significance of their relationship. What Solomon may have seen as temporary pleasure became, through the Queen's foresight, the foundation for one of history's longest-lasting royal lineages. Islamic traditions, particularly those preserved in the Quran and Hadith literature, take a more sympathetic view of Solomon's intentions, suggesting he recognized the Queen's exceptional qualities and sought a legitimate union. These accounts describe how Solomon, impressed by her wisdom during their intellectual exchanges, offered marriage as a gesture of genuine respect rather than conquest. This perspective presents their relationship as a rare example of intellectual equals finding mutual recognition across cultural and religious boundaries. The sexual politics of their encounter represent more than ancient gossip. They illuminate how gender and power operated at the intersection of politics, diplomacy, and desire. That Solomon, with his legendary 700 wives and 300 concubines, would pursue yet another sexual conquest seems consistent with biblical descriptions of his later life. Yet the Queen's apparent ability to transform what began as potential exploitation into dynastic advantage suggests remarkable political calculation that transcended conventional gender limitations of the ancient world. The controversial implication is that Solomon's wisdom failed precisely where the Queen's prevailed, in recognizing how personal relationships could be leveraged for long-term political advantage rather than immediate gratification. If Solomon sought temporary pleasure, the Queen secured eternal legacy, establishing her son as the progenitor of a dynasty that would outlast Solomon's own fractured kingdom by millennia. This hidden romantic narrative thus becomes not just a titillating footnote but a profound reversal of conventional power dynamics, where female strategic foresight overcame male tactical advantage, transforming what Solomon may have intended as conquest into the Queen's ultimate triumph. Could history's most sacred religious artifact, the Ark of the Covenant, have been spirited away to Ethiopia by Solomon's own son, creating a second chosen people unknown to Western religious tradition? This extraordinary claim lies at the heart of Ethiopian national identity yet remains largely dismissed by Western religious scholars. According to Ethiopian tradition, the union between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba produced a son who would not only establish Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty but execute history's most consequential religious heist, the appropriation of Judaism's holiest relic. The Kebra Nagast provides the most detailed account of this remarkable story. According to this text, when the Queen returned to her kingdom, she was pregnant with Solomon's child. She gave birth to a son named Menelik, sometimes called Ibn Hakim, meaning son of the wise, raising him as her heir with stories of his illustrious father. When Menelik reached adulthood, his curiosity about Solomon became overwhelming, and despite his mother's reluctance to part with him, she eventually permitted him to visit Jerusalem. Upon Menelik's arrival, Solomon reportedly recognized him immediately, seeing his own features mirrored in the young man's face. Overjoyed to discover this previously unknown heir, Solomon lavished attention on Menelik and began plotting to keep him in Jerusalem permanently. According to Ethiopian tradition, Solomon even proposed that Menelik succeed him as king of Israel instead of his official heir, Rehoboam, having recognized superior qualities in his Ethiopian son. Menelik, however, remained determined to return to his mother's kingdom. Reluctantly accepting this decision, Solomon proposed sending representatives of each of Israel's 12 tribes to accompany Menelik back to Ethiopia, ostensibly to establish proper worship practices but perhaps also to maintain influence over his son's development as a ruler. Among these representatives was Azariah, son of the high priest Zadok, who would play a pivotal role in what followed. The night before their departure, according to Ethiopian tradition, Azariah had a divine vision instructing him to take the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia. Without informing Menelik, Azariah and his fellow priests created a perfect replica of the Ark and secretly substituted it for the original, which they packed among their travel provisions. Various versions of the story differ on whether this theft was divinely sanctioned or human initiative, but all agree on the outcome. The true ark left Jerusalem for Ethiopia. Only after they were well beyond Solomon's reach did Azariah reveal to Menelik what had been done. Initially shocked and concerned about his father's reaction, Menelik eventually accepted this development as divine will, particularly after miraculous events occurred during their journey. The most dramatic of these involved the ark seemingly transporting the entire party instantaneously across vast distances and bodies of water when they were pursued by Solomon's forces. Supernatural assistance that convinced Menelik of divine approval for the ark's relocation. This extraordinary narrative has profound theological implications. If true, it suggests that divine favor transferred from Israel to Ethiopia, a second chosen people unknown to Western religious tradition. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains to this day that the original ark resides in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, guarded by a specially appointed monk who alone may view it. No outsider is permitted to see the ark, intensifying both its mystery and the controversy surrounding Ethiopia's claim. Archaeological evidence provides tantalizing, if inconclusive, support for aspects of this narrative. The ancient city of Aksum shows clear evidence of Jewish religious practices predating Christianity, including stelae with Star of David symbols and excavated homes with distinctly Jewish ritual baths. Genetic studies have confirmed that many Ethiopian Jews, Beta Israel, carry genetic markers linking them to ancient Middle Eastern populations, suggesting a historical connection to Israel that aligns with the Menelik narrative. More compelling is the documented historical reality of the Solomonic dynasty itself. Ethiopian emperors from the 13th century until Haile Selassie's deposition in 1974 claimed direct descent from Menelik I and, by extension, from Solomon and David. This dynastic claim wasn't merely symbolic but formed the constitutional basis for imperial authority. The Ethiopian imperial coronation ceremony explicitly referenced this Solomonic lineage, with emperors crowned as conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, directly invoking their supposed Davidic ancestry. The implications of this narrative extend beyond Ethiopian national pride. If Menelik did indeed establish a Solomonic dynasty in Ethiopia with the Ark of the Covenant, it suggests a radical theological possibility, that God's covenant expanded beyond Israel to include Ethiopia as a second chosen people. This would fundamentally challenge the exclusivity central to much of Jewish and Christian theological tradition. Islamic traditions offer interesting parallels that lend credibility to aspects of the Ethiopian account. The Quran mentions the Queen of Sheba's conversion to Solomon's monotheistic faith, and several hadith reference Solomon having a son with her. These independent confirmations from another Abrahamic tradition suggest the core narrative contains elements of historical truth, even if embellished over centuries. Western scholars have typically dismissed the Menelik narrative as nationalist mythology, pointing to the lack of archaeological evidence for the ark's presence in Ethiopia and the chronological gaps in the Solomonic genealogy. However, this dismissal often reflects Western academic biases rather than genuine engagement with Ethiopian historical sources. The recent trend toward decolonizing historical scholarship has led to renewed interest in these traditions as potentially containing historical kernels worth serious consideration. The controversy surrounding Menelik and the Ark ultimately transcends historical debate. It challenges fundamental assumptions about divine election, religious authority, and the Western-centric nature of biblical interpretation. If Ethiopia's claims contain even partial truth, they suggest that the divine narrative continued along a parallel track unknown to or deliberately excluded from Western religious tradition. A second chosen people whose covenant remains unacknowledged by those who claim exclusive inheritance of biblical promises. Whether literal truth, allegorical representation, or national mythology, the story of Menelik represents one of history's most audacious claims, that the son born from the union of history's wisest king and most enigmatic queen secured for his mother's people the most sacred object of his father's religion, completing the Queen of Sheba's ultimate triumph over Solomon through the achievements of their shared legacy.